If you think modern megacorporations and global supply chains are a totally new invention, well, wait until you see how they did it in medieval South India. Let's dive right into this explainer and uncover the overlapping epic stories of two of medieval South India's greatest dynasties, the Cholas and the Pandyas. These guys weren't just regional powers, they were absolute juggernauts of trade, monumental engineering, and surprisingly sophisticated local governance. Today, we're going to look at the mechanisms that built these empires up, the wealth that made them globally famous, and the internal fractures that ultimately tore them down.
Right off the bat, the immense scale of Chola influence is just staggering. We're looking at a core kingdom concentrated in the Kaveri River Delta, an area that came to be known as Chola Mandalam, or as we often hear it today, the Coromandel Coast. But they definitely didn't just stay put there. Their influence expanded vastly. They didn't just conquer neighboring Tama lands. They utilized a massive navy to project power way out across the Bay of Bengal, into Sri Lanka, the Maldives, and incredibly, even as far as the Srivijaya Kingdom in Southeast Asia. So, here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll track the rise of the Imperial Cholas, check out their engineering and local rule, explore the Pandya resurgence, look at their global trade and wealth, and finally, unpack the sudden fall of these empires. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the rise of the Imperial Cholas. This dynastic ascent, it was lightning fast. The resurgence really kicks off around 850 CE with a ruler named Vijayala, who captured the Kaveri Delta and built the city of Tanjavur. His successors then aggressively pushed the borders outward. But it was truly under Raja I and his son Rajendra I, bridging the late 10th and early 11th centuries, that the empire hit its absolute peak. By the time Rajendra I was in charge, the Cholas were launching these striking military expeditions all the way up to the Godavari River and even the Ganges in northern India. Moving right along to Section 2, Chola engineering and local rule. Okay, this is wild. The Uttaramura inscriptions from the early 10th century reveal a brilliantly structured local election process. In these Brahmin settlements, the village was actually divided into 30 distinct wards. But you couldn't just volunteer for leadership. There were strict qualifications based on age, property ownership, and knowledge of specific texts. If you were eligible, your name was written on a palm leaf slip and placed into a pot. This was a system known as kudavoy. Then, right in front of the whole assembly, a young boy would literally draw the winning slips from the pot. Imagine using a highly structured, strict lottery system to elect your modern city council. It is just a fascinating glimpse into early organized local governance. And they honestly needed those well-run committees because their public works were next level. When it comes to their water management, this quote captures the absolute awe of the 11th century Arab traveler Al-Biruni. He was reacting to things like Rajendra Chola's massive irrigation tank at Gangaikonda Cholapuram. We're talking about an embankment of solid masonry stretching 16 miles long. The Cholas understood perfectly that agricultural surplus was the literal lifeblood of their empire's revenue, so they invested heavily in meticulously engineered water infrastructure. And remarkably, you can actually still see the surviving archaeological ruins of these ancient sluice mechanisms today. The Cholas designed complex crisscross channel systems to harness rainwater. They even had specific state-assigned water rights that rigorously regulated the exact share of water distributed to parceled-out lands, really super carefully through stone head channels and sluices. Naturally, all that agrarian wealth flowed upward. And no discussion of the Cholas is complete without talking about the Brihadishwara Temple. Built by Raja I in Tanjavur, this structure is a total marvel of Chola architecture. The main sanctum features a towering structure that is 190 feet tall, capped with a massive stone block weighing a mind-boggling 80 tons. How on earth did they lift 80 tons 190 feet into the air in the 11th century? To this day, it remains a spectacular statement of political legitimacy and devotion. But here's what you really gotta understand. Think of these grand temples less like mere places of worship and more like the Fortune 500 corporations and civic centers of medieval Tamil society. They literally functioned as major banks that advance loans. They had their own internal auditors checking the temple accounts. They employed massive staffs of dancers, musicians, and craftsmen, and they served as major educational centers where arts, music, and philosophy were taught. Which brings us to Section 3, the Pandya resurgence. So, as the Cholas began to fade from external pressures by the late 12th century, the Pandya saw their opportunity and seized it to rapidly reclaim power. By the 13th century, ruling from their capital in Madurai, they became the paramount dynasty in South India. Kings like Jatavarman Sundarapandian brought the entire Tamil country under his control, and his successor, Maravarman Kulasekharan, finally ended the Chola dynasty in 1279, ushering in 40 years of peace and immense prosperity for the Pandya state.
Now for Section 4, Global Trade and Pandya Wealth.
This resurgence ushered in an absolute golden age of international commerce. At bustling East Coast ports like Kayal, a highly sophisticated maritime economy was just booming. They exported highly desired local commodities, things like spices, precious gems, and their famous pearls. In return, they imported camphor, copper, mercury, and, perhaps most importantly, horses. The trade was massive, often facilitated by very powerful merchant guilds, and conducted using a medium of gold coins.
To really understand their military and ceremonial priorities, you have to consider this staggering figure. The Pandyas imported as many as 10,000 horses annually into Kayal and other ports. The Pandya kings heavily invested in these animals, relying on a wider Arab commercial network to supply them for fighting wars and, of course, for grand ceremonial purposes.
And they were paying an absolute premium for them. They actually set up an agency with an Arab chieftain named Jamaluddin to secure these horses, with each one costing an average of 220 dinars of pure red gold. To put that into perspective for us today, this was essentially like buying a fleet of modern luxury sports cars imported annually just to showcase their staggering agricultural and trade wealth. This economic boom was so impressive, it even caught the eye of the famous Venetian traveler Marco Polo, who visited the port of Kayal twice, in 1288 and again in 1293. He basically left the 13th century equivalent of a glowing 5-star review. He specifically praised the Pandya kings for their fair administration and their generous policies toward overseas traders. He noted that the port was just bustling with business activities and packed with ships arriving from as far away as Arabia and China.
Finally, we reach Section 5, the fall of the empires.
Because history is rarely stable for long, right? Despite their vast wealth, a bitter succession crisis erupted in 1302. The ruling king, Maravarman Kulasekharan, heavily favored one son, Sundara Pandyan, and appointed him as co-regent. Well, this provoked his other son, Veera Pandyan, who ended up assassinating their father. It sparked a brutal, practically Game of Thrones-style civil war. Veera Pandyan won and took the throne, which caused the defeated brother, Sundara Pandyan, to flee north to Delhi, seeking refuge and assistance from the Sultan, Alauddin Khalji. And this internal division, it was a fatal mistake. It opened the front door for Malik Kafur, a general of the Delhi Sultanate, to launch a devastating invasion in 1311. Finding the capital of Madurai completely empty because Veera Pandyan had already fled, Kafur desecrated the temple and stripped the city of a staggering amount of royal wealth. Historical estimates suggest he looted 512 elephants, 5,000 horses, and 500 mounds of precious gems like diamonds and rubies. Wealth that was subsequently dragged back to Delhi to consolidate power up there. The collapse following this event was incredibly rapid. After that 1311 invasion, the once unified Pandya kingdom basically splintered among various family members. It took just a couple of decades for the region to be entirely transformed. By 1335, the Muslim governor of Madurai threw off his allegiance to Delhi and established an independent sultanate right there in the heart of the ancient Pandya capital. Which leaves us with a pretty heavy, provocative thought to consider. How does a society with centuries of monumental wealth, localized democracy, and grand engineering collapse so swiftly from within? It brilliantly illustrates the absolute fragility of power. No matter how many 80-10 stones you lift into the sky or how many thousands of war horses you import, a civilization's survival almost always hinges on the unity of the people and the families leading it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history that builds our world.